Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with a spoiler-free review for The Scandalous Confessions of Lydia Bennet, Witch by Melinda Taub. I did receive this advance copy in exchange for an honest review, and I'm also going to list content warnings for this book in the description. So if you guys have been on my channel a while, you might know that Melinda Taub also wrote Still Star-Crossed, which is a Romeo and Juliet sort of like after sequel, kind of like retelling, and it's one of my favorite books, and I love it, and I talk about it quite a lot, and it came out a while ago, so this is Melinda Taub's like first novel since then, so this has been one of my most anticipated releases since I knew about it, and I was so excited to get an advance copy. So this is going to be my spoiler-free review for this novel. So as you can probably guess, this is a historical fantasy retelling of Pride and Prejudice, but it obviously goes in a lot of different directions as well, and our main character is of course Lydia Bennet, who in this version of the story, she is a witch. She discovers pretty young that she has magical powers, so we're following her as our main character, and we kind of see glimpses of some important things that happen in Pride and Prejudice. Like there are some scenes that are directly from the novel, but we see like Lydia's perspective on them, and like we see, you know, different characters' interactions with them and kind of like dialogue and things like that. So I never felt like it leaned too heavily on the Pride and Prejudice scenes. So as far as Lydia as a main character, she's definitely one of the Bennet sisters who I think does not get as many retellings. I think I've maybe heard of one or two others, but she's not a very popular character to get her own retelling. And in terms of my feelings on her from the original novel, I have always had sympathy for her. I definitely think that she can be very selfish and thoughtless, and I do think that she did a lot to harm her family, and she didn't really notice or care that that's what she was doing. But also, I always have felt like she didn't deserve what happened to her. So I kind of went into this book, you know, knowing I love Melinda Taub as an author and being very intrigued by the idea of this retelling centering Lydia, and I went in with some sympathy for her. So we follow her kind of figuring out more about her powers. We do see her when she's pretty young, but most of the book takes place like when she is the age that she is for most of Pride and Prejudice, which is around like 15. We see her close relationship with Kitty, one of her other sisters, and then there's also a good chunk of this book that is taken up with Lydia being kind of tricked into a deal in order to, like it relates to like finding this magical thing, and she has agreed to this deal in order to protect one of the people that she cares about. So starting off with Lydia as a main character, I absolutely loved her. I think Melinda Taub did such an incredible job of like definitely using the characterization of her in Pride and Prejudice, but giving her backstory, giving her motivations, giving her like quirks and like endearing characteristics, and I just feel like it was the absolute perfect balance between, obviously Melinda Taub knows the source material very well and she pays attention to that, and then also kind of filling in the story around Lydia and giving her a more sympathetic portrayal and making her, you know, the main character of her own story. I really, really felt for her so much, and I loved the writing. This is first person. We end up finding out a little bit more about why Lydia is writing the story the way she is. And I found her voice and her character so incredibly endearing. I was just so invested in her. I wanted things to turn out well for her. I cared about her, and she also is... It's interesting because, like, she is thoughtless, she is sometimes selfish, the way that we know her from the original novel, but we see the other things that she is as well, and we also see that she is maybe harder on herself than she should be. I also feel like for most of this book, like, she really is doing her best to make the best decision she can, and trying to help the people that she cares about, and she does make mistakes, but they are very believable. They make sense to me. There were actually multiple points where like I honestly wasn't sure what the best move would be or like who she should trust. I think that even though there is quite a bit of plot that happens in like throughout most of this book, I do think that Lydia is one of those narrators, one of those main characters who is so like present in like the voice of the story that I do think probably enjoyment is going to hinge a lot on how well you get along with her as the narrator. Like to an extent that's true of any main character, but I think especially with the writing style of this narrative, and also like Lydia's personality, I think that is going to be a pretty big piece of how you get on with the story. For me, that was fine because as I've been saying, I loved her and I felt for her so much. I found her a really engaging main character. I think that, like, I was so invested in seeing her seeing her struggle to do the right thing when she's not used to thinking of herself as a good person. I just thought that was incredibly interesting, and she is a lot of fun. Like, there is so much humor in this book that I loved, and she has that sense of fun that I think is one of the best qualities of Lydia from the original novel, and I think that fun is also present here, even though there is, like, you know, some pretty serious plot things that happen. And also, with how much fun Lydia is, that is something else that I appreciate is such a focus of her characterization in this book, because as frustrating as she can be in the original story, I have always thought that she seems like a fun character or a fun person. Like, she does go over the top, and she is very much, like, not thinking about how her actions affect other people. But I do think it's funny, like, Lydia herself in this book kind of, like, thinks to herself, like, you know, people often get irritated at me because I come out and say things that everybody's thinking. And I think that's true. Like, the way that she, like, thinks of Mr. Collins or talks to him is really rude. Not a nice thing to do, but also I think maybe a lot of us would also be thinking or wanting to say those things, and the difference is that Lydia says them, which is not to say that it's okay or that manners don't matter, because I think they do. But I feel like that kind of honesty and that, like, sense of fun, I think that's an important part of who Lydia is, and I really enjoyed seeing that in this retelling. And I also really loved just the characterization in general. I think was fantastic. I loved Kitty, and I loved Lydia and Kitty's, like, bond and relationship. I don't want to get into details because I think it's really cool to, like, experience it as you read the story, like, find out some things. But I loved that bond there. I also thought the supporting characters were really, really interesting, and like Lydia, it was something that made sense based on the original novel, but then also with the changes that Melinda Taub has made to the story, it's like, oh, of course this would be how this played out in this version of the story, you know? Which I always think is cool when a retelling can do that, when it can just sort of effortlessly, like, fill in the gaps of the original story. Like, it doesn't contradict it, but it gives you kind of more. It gives you, like, a different perspective. It gives you, like, more information about how some things might have happened. There's also a little bit of a romance element in this that I am surprised worked for me as well as it did. I do think that we maybe could have had, I don't know, a little more time spent on it, but I still bought it and I still thought it was interesting. And that was another piece where, like, I honestly wasn't sure what direction things were gonna go. And I mentioned already that I really, really loved the writing of this book. Like, Lydia as a main character and as a narrator is just, again, I keep saying the word endearing, but, like, that really is how I felt about her, is that she's so, like, young and vibrant, and she's, like, she can be a tiny bit silly, but she's not stupid. And it was just such a joy to follow her, and my heart hurt for her with some of these things that happened. And I was so upset on her behalf that people never expected better from her. And in terms of the style, I also feel like there was the perfect amount of Jane Austen flavor to the narration. I felt the same way with her Shakespeare retelling, where it's, like, definitely, like, situated in that time period. There's, like, enough, like, flavor. She clearly, like, does her research and pays attention to how people speak, but it's not so much a duplicate that it is, you know, either boring or that it would be off-putting to somebody who maybe doesn't read Jane Austen. Like, I think if you are interested in this book but you're a little hesitant because you don't read a lot of classics, I feel like that shouldn't be a concern here. Like, I think that the writing is just really expressive and very approachable while still being really thoughtful. There's a lot of beauty, there's a lot of, like, humor and heart. There's some, like, heartbreaking moments as well, and I just think all of that is delivered beautifully. And then one of the things that I think is most impressive about this book is how it functions as a retelling. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but this is just such a brilliant, smart, clever story. Like, I am so in awe of how Melinda Taub did this, because the way that she takes these tiny, tiny, tiny little pieces of Pride and Prejudice, or of, like, things that we know about Lydia, and that she fits them perfectly into her historical fantasy, I think is, like, absolutely phenomenal. Like, I actually don't want to give too many details of, like, some of the changes that she made or some of the interpretations of things, because I think they're just so clever, and it's so much fun to, like, come across those as you're reading. Pride and Prejudice is definitely the Austen novel that I know best. I have read it the most times. I am very, very familiar with, like the whole thing. And so to pick up on these like absolutely minuscule little like details that Melinda Taub will like work into her story and her characterization was just such a joy. Like she clearly knows and loves the source material. And again, I just think that this book is that perfect middle ground between fitting in with the original novel, but then also being its own story. And it's just, it's so smart. It's so clever. I love it. And I think that you can definitely follow this book even if you are not super familiar with Pride and Prejudice. There's also another like Austen story that she brings in just a little bit that I thought was really well done too. But primarily this is a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and I definitely think that you can follow it without that backstory. Like it definitely is, you know, cohesive as its own story. I think there is an added element of enjoyment from picking up on references and noticing the things that Melinda Taub changed or interpreted. Like that is part of the fun and the brilliance of this book. But in terms of being able to follow the story, I definitely think it stands on its own. And then I also really liked the thematic elements of this book and the way that those were handled. So if you are somebody who really likes in fantasy books when there's a lot of focus on the cost of magic having a price, I think you will really get on with that part of this book. I thought that was really, really interesting. So there is a lot of themes about sacrifice and love and how those things might intersect and who is responsible for giving something up. This book also, because of Lydia being the main character especially, it deals a lot with the double standards for women and men of this period. Just in general. And I thought that was so smartly done. Like it wasn't the main focus of the story, but it was something that was always present and that Lydia noticed and thought about. And I just thought that was really, really well written in this book. And then also I think that the magical elements, the way that Melinda Taub connected those to some of these bigger themes, to me felt it felt pretty respectful. Some of it is for things I can't speak to. Like there is discussion of like the slave trade in this book, and I can't like definitively, you know, speak to how well that was handled or anything. But I personally feel like the way that she incorporated that into a story that also included magic felt very respectful, because it did not feel like, this is something that irritates me about a lot of like kind of historical fantasies or fantasy stories in general. It did not feel like it was replacing real world suffering with magical suffering or magical elements. Instead, she connected these different ideas of controlling people and then like using people as objects in ways that I think were really smart, and that again kind of pointed to, sometimes explicitly pointed to these real world examples without being disrespectful by like equating them. And I just thought that was really well done as well. And then finally, in terms of the plot, I thought this was really interesting. I didn't know what direction things were going to go in. And I ended up feeling like it came together really, really well. There were a couple of moments that felt like more of a lull in the book, but because I just loved Lydia as a main character, because I loved the writing of this book, because I just loved what this book is doing in terms of a retelling and everything, all of that enjoyment was able to very easily carry me through some kind of slower spots. And then one of the only things that I maybe would have liked to see a little bit more done with is there is an element, like one of the side characters' stories involves a family history of mental illness. And I think the way that that specifically was dealt with regarding magic, like how those things were connected, I think that could have been better, because I have some questions about, I don't know, some implications about that. But I do like that character, the character who has that family history, is ultimately the one making the decisions about what's going to happen. Like the decisions that they're making that affect them, they are the ones who actually get to make those choices, which I do think is important, and I appreciate that. So that's just kind of like one little thing that I think we maybe could have, I don't know, handled a little better or like more thoroughly. But in general, you can probably tell that I really, really loved this book, and I'm so glad. It's always nice when you have a favorite author who delivers for you, and especially after such a long writing gap. So I am ecstatic to say that I gave The Scandalous Confessions of Lydia Bennet Witch 5 stars. I would definitely recommend it. As I've said, I think that if you're really interested in it, but you're holding back because either you don't think you know Pride and Prejudice well enough, or maybe you're not a fan of Lydia, you don't know how you'd feel about her as the main character, I think that those things shouldn't be would hold you back from trying this, you know? Especially because I was looking at other reviews and there were quite a few people who said that like, I've never liked Lydia, but I really loved her in this book, or I loved this book about her. So I think that is also something to consider. So as I said, 5 stars. Please let me know if you are planning to pick this book up. I'm going to put the information about the release date and where you can order this if you are interested. I am obviously very excited for the release and for hopefully more people to read it. Yeah, so let me know if you are planning to pick this one up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!